In the spring of 1928, a courthouse worker in Pike County filed a paper that listed Ruth Kincaid, age 12, as transferred household worker to a family 30 miles deeper into the mountains. What officials wrote down as a home arrangement was actually a deal that took everything away from a child. The paper sat in a filing cabinet for 55 years before a college student researching Appalachian work practices discovered it tucked between property papers and timber contracts. The entry, dated April 14, 1928, had 3 signatures. The first belonged to Hiram Spurlock, owner of a remote trading post in the eastern Kentucky mountains. The second came from Edith Spurlock, his wife. The third signature, shaky and uncertain, read simply, "O. Paul Kincaid." Ruth had become a business deal. The Spurlock family ran their trading post in a valley so isolated that neighboring homes measured distance in hours of walking rather than miles. County records showed the Spurlocks had lived there since 1892, when Hiram's grandfather built the post to serve scattered mining camps and timber operations. By 1928, the business had passed to Hiram and Edith, a couple with no children who managed inventory, gave credit to mountain families, and kept careful records of every exchange that crossed their counter. Those records, saved through Historical Society donation in 1976, revealed the true nature of the arrangement. Ruth Kincaid was listed not as adopted daughter or ward, but as household worker obtained through contract. The terms said that she would live with the Spurlock family, do household chores as required, and receive room, clothing, and religious teaching in exchange. Her mother, Opal Poot, would receive quarterly payments of $1.12, plus regular deliveries of flour, salt, kerosene, and other basics from the trading post supplies. 12 every 3 months, the 48 per year. That was the price Opal Poot had placed on her daughter's childhood. The contract had no rules for Ruth's education, no details about the type or length of her work, and no end date. Most tellingly, it included a rule stating that Ruth would take the Spurlock last name for as long as she lived there, and that all letters with her previous family would be handled through the Spurlocks as appropriate. Ruth Kincaid was being erased. Contemporary newspaper reports from the Prestonburg Herald mentioned the Spurlock trading post only twice during this time. The first mention, from November 1927, noted that Hiram Spurlock had purchased a new freight wagon to improve deliveries to isolated homes. The second, dated January 1929, announced that the Spurlocks had welcomed a young helper to help manage the expanding household operations. No name was given. No age was mentioned. Ruth had already become invisible in the public record, reduced to an unnamed helper in someone else's story. But Ruth Kincaid remembered in diaries discovered after her death in 1983. She wrote with painful clarity about the spring morning when her mother told her to pack her belongings. She remembered the wagon ride into deeper mountains, watching her home disappear behind ridge lines. She remembered arriving at the Spurlock place and understanding with the terrible wisdom children possess that she was not a guest or even a servant. She was property her mother had sold. Blackberry Hollow earned its name from the thick bushes of wild berries that covered the narrow valley bottom each summer. The Kincaid family had worked 47 acres there since 1893, when Ruth's grandfather claimed the land through a timber company settlement. By 1926, when Ruth turned 10, the homestead consisted of a 2-room cabin, a failing vegetable garden, and 3 dairy cows that provided the family's only reliable income. Ruth's father, Daniel Kincaid, worked the coal seam that ran beneath Cooperton Mountain, walking 6 miles each way to reach the mine entrance. Pike County records show he died on September 23, 1926, when a support beam collapsed in shaft number 4. He was 31 years old. The mining company paid his widow $87 in settlement, an amount calculated at roughly 2 months of Daniel's wages. Opal Kincaid suddenly found herself alone with 2 daughters in a hollow that swallowed families whole during lean winters. Ruth's younger sister Ada was only 6 when their father died. County census records from 1930 show Ada still living in Blackberry Hollow, suggesting she remained with Opal throughout the events that would scatter Ruth to the mountains. The difference mattered. When Vernon Poot began courting Opal that October, barely a month after Daniel's burial, he made clear decisions about which children fit his vision for the household. Vern ran a timber crew that worked with lumber companies working the eastern ridges. He owned a 4-mule team, maintained his own sawing equipment, and employed 3 to 5 men depending on the season. By mountain standards, Vernon Poot was prosperous. He was also a widower with 3 sons, ages 14, 12, and 9, who needed a woman to manage the household while Vernon focused on timber operations. The marriage happened on January 7, 1927, in a ceremony witnessed by Vernon's oldest son and the Baptist preacher from Elkhorn. Records show that Vernon moved his 3 boys into the Kincaid cabin that same week, transforming the small dwelling into quarters for 8 people. The arrangement strained immediately. Ruth's diary entries from this time, written years later from memory, describe growing tensions. Vernon's sons received priority for food portions, sleeping space, and their father's attention. Ada, being younger and quieter, adapted by becoming nearly invisible. Ruth, approaching her teenage years and protective of her mother's shrinking resources, found herself in constant conflict with her stepbrothers over territory, chores, and the basic logistics of survival in an overcrowded cabin. By the summer of 1927, Opal was pregnant with twins. The pregnancy complicated everything. Vernon's timber operation required his sons to work the logging sites, but the household still needed tending. Someone had to cook, clean, mind livestock, haul water from the spring, and prepare for the arrival of 2 more mouths to feed. Ruth, at 11, became that someone. But even a hardworking daughter couldn't solve the basic math of poverty. 9 people in 2 rooms. Limited income stretched across too many needs, and when Opal gave birth to twin boys in March 1928, the cabin's population reached 11. Vernon Poot began making suggestions about alternative arrangements. Later testimony from neighbors would reveal that Vernon had been discussing Ruth's situation with Hiram Spurlock since February 1928. The trading post owner needed household help. His wife Edith struggled to manage the store while caring for their twin toddlers. Vernon knew the Spurlocks from timber deals and proposed a solution that would relieve the Kincaid Poot household while providing the Spurlocks with reliable labor. Opal signed the papers 6 weeks after giving birth. Ruth learned of the arrangement 3 days before the wagon came to collect her. The document that made Ruth's transfer official survived because Hiram Spurlock kept copies of every important transaction. Filed under household contracts and labor agreements, the papers took up 3 pages of careful handwriting, each clause designed to make legal what amounted to the purchase of a child. The agreement's language revealed careful construction. Rather than adoption or guardianship, terms that would have triggered county oversight, the document established Ruth as an indentured domestic helper bound to the Spurlock household through mutual benefit arrangement. This wording exploited a gray area in Kentucky law that allowed families to place children in work situations without formal foster care procedures, provided both parties signed willingly and compensation was exchanged. Opal's signature appeared at the bottom of page 3, dated April 14, 1928. The handwriting wavered, suggesting hesitation, or perhaps simply the hand of someone not used to signing legal documents. Beside her mark, a witness signature belonged to Vernon Poot, who thereby confirmed his wife's authority to contract away her daughter's childhood. The payment structure was carefully itemized 12 per quarter, paid at the end of each 3-month period. Monthly deliveries of 20 pounds of flour, 10 pounds of salt pork, 5 pounds of white beans, and 3 gallons of kerosene. Semi-annual provisions of fabric, thread, and other household supplies is determined by the Spurlocks based on available inventory and market conditions, calculated yearly. Opal would receive approximately 48 in cash plus goods valued at perhaps 30 more. For this sum, Ruth would provide unlimited labor, surrender her family name, and give up any claim to childhood freedom. The contract specified no holidays, no limits on working hours, and no requirement that Ruth receive education beyond what the Spurlocks deemed appropriate for their household needs. Most damaging was the communication clause. All letters Ruth received or sent would pass through Hiram Spurlock's review. Visits from family members required advanced approval and would be scheduled at the Spurlock's convenience. These rules buried in the middle of page 2 effectively cut Ruth off from any support network that might question her treatment or fight for her return. The contract also addressed Ruth's future. Should she attempt to leave the Spurlock household before reaching 18 years of age, Opal Poot would be required to return all money and goods received plus interest calculated at 6% yearly. This penalty clause ensured that even if Ruth ran away, her mother would have powerful financial reason to return her to the Spurlocks rather than offer shelter. Legal experts who later examined the document noted its sophisticated construction. Someone with understanding of contract law had written these terms, likely an attorney in Prestonburg or Pikerville who specialized in business deals. The language protected the Spurlocks from accusations of child exploitation, while binding Ruth as effectively as any slave contract from the previous century. Hiram Spurlock paid Vernon $5 cash to transport Ruth from Blackberry Hollow to the trading post, a transaction also carefully documented in the ledger. The notation specified delivery charge for household helper, April 17, 1928. Even the wagon ride that carried Ruth away from her home became an itemized business expense. On the morning of her departure, Opal gave Ruth a canvas bag containing 2 dresses, an extra pair of shoes, undergarments, and a hairbrush that had belonged to Daniel Kincaid. She did not hug her daughter. She did not comfort her. According to Ruth's later memories, her mother simply said that the arrangement was necessary, that Ada and the twins needed space and resources, and that Ruth should be grateful the Spurlocks were willing to take her at all. Vernon's wagon left before dawn. Ruth sat in the back beside bundles of freight bound for the trading post. She watched Blackberry Hollow disappear into the morning mist, understanding with terrible clarity that she was not being sent away temporarily. She was being permanently thrown away. The Spurlock trading post sat in a valley so remote that the mail carrier made deliveries only on the 1st and 15th of each month, weather permitting. The main building held both the store and the family's living quarters, a practical arrangement that allowed Hiram to watch inventory while Edith managed customers. Behind the main structure stood a storage shed, a smokehouse, livestock pens, and a small building that had once served as a bunkhouse for temporary workers. Ruth slept in the storage shed. Her quarters consisted of a narrow space between stacked flour barrels and crates of canned goods, barely wide enough for the corn husk mattress Edith provided. A wool blanket offered minimal protection against cold that seeped through gaps in the plank walls. During her first winter there, Ruth woke most mornings to find frost coating the inside of the shed, her breath visible in the darkness before dawn. The daily routine began at 4:30 each morning. Ruth hauled water from the spring, a quarter-mile walk down a steep path that became dangerous with ice from November through March. She lit fires in both the cook stove and the heating stove, prepared breakfast for the Spurlock family, fed the chickens and pigs, and milked the 2 dairy cows. Only after these tasks could she eat whatever remained from the family's meal. Edith Spurlock supervised Ruth's work with careful attention to detail. The floors must be swept twice daily. The dish towels must be boiled every Monday. The twin boys, Thomas and James, ages 3 when Ruth arrived, required constant watching because Edith claimed her weak health prevented her from chasing active toddlers. Ruth became their shadow, preventing them from wandering into the storage areas, keeping them entertained during long store hours, and changing soiled clothing while Edith managed the account books. The twins learned quickly that Ruth existed to serve them. They demanded food between meals through tantrums that Ruth was expected to calm without disturbing the store's customers, and reported any perceived slight to their mother. Edith responded to these reports with swift punishment, usually involving withheld meals or additional chores assigned after dark. Hiram Spurlock spoke to Ruth only to give instructions or corrections. He watched her work through silent observation, appearing without warning to inspect the livestock pens or examine the kitchen for cleanliness. His presence carried hidden threat. When Ruth failed to meet his standards, he took away the cost of wasted supplies from Opal's quarterly payment, a practice documented in his careful ledgers where Ruth's mistakes appeared as financial losses. During her first months at the trading post, Ruth tried to write letters to her mother. She created them mentally while hauling water or feeding livestock, then borrowed paper and pencil from the store's supplies when Edith wasn't watching. The letters described her living conditions, her exhaustion, her isolation. She asked when she might visit home. She begged her mother to reconsider the arrangement. Hiram stopped every letter. Ruth discovered this during her 3rd month when she found her own letters in Hiram's desk drawer, unopened and bundled with string. When confronted, Hiram explained calmly that the contract gave him power over all communications. He told Ruth that her mother had specifically requested no letters be forwarded, claiming that backward-looking correspondence caused unnecessary upset for everyone involved. The quarterly payments to Opal continued arriving on schedule. Ruth knew this because Hiram kept the receipts filed prominently where she would see them during her cleaning duties. Each receipt represented proof that her mother knew exactly where Ruth was, understood the terms of her servitude, and chose to accept payment rather than demand her daughter's return. By Ruth's 13th birthday in November 1928, she understood that escape was impossible. The trading post sat too far from any town for a child to reach on foot. The surrounding families all did business with the Spurlocks and would return any runaway immediately. The contract bound her legally until age 18, 6 years away. She had become a ghost in her own life, trapped in a valley where even her screams would echo only against uncaring mountains. Throughout 1929 and into 1930, Ruth existed in a silence broken only by the demands of her labor. No letters arrived from Blackberry Hollow. No messages came with the mail carrier. When seasonal timber workers stopped at the trading post for supplies, Ruth listened desperately for any mention of the Poot household, any news that might connect her to the family she'd been torn from. In October 1929, a timber crew working contracts near Cooperton Mountain included a man who recognized the name Poot. During his transaction at the store, he mentioned that Vernon's operation had grown significantly, now employing 8 men and acquiring a second team of mules. The twins, he noted, were thriving boys who went with their father to the work sites. Vernon's wife had delivered them safely and recovered well. Ruth absorbed this information while scrubbing floors in the next room. Her mother was healthy. The household was doing well. No one had mentioned Ruth's absence or asked about her welfare. She had been erased so completely that even casual conversation about her former family continued as though she had never existed. The quarterly payments continued with mechanical regularity. Hiram recorded each transaction in his ledger, 12 every 3 months deposited to Opal's account at the Pikeville banking house. The precision of these payments told Ruth everything she needed to know. Her mother tracked the arrangement carefully enough to collect the money, but showed no interest in the girl generating that income. Winter brought a traveling preacher who held services in the trading post's main room once monthly. Families from surrounding hollows gathered for these occasions, one of the few social events in the isolated region. Ruth served coffee and cornbread to attendees while listening to conversations that revealed how connected mountain communities were. Everyone knew everyone's business. Everyone understood which families struggled and which did well. No one ever asked about the girl living in the Spurlock storage shed. During one such gathering in January 1930, Ruth overheard 2 women discussing Opal Poot. The conversation praised Opal's management of such a large household, marveling at how she stretched resources to feed Vernon's boys plus the twins. One woman mentioned that Opal had recently bought a new cook stove, a big purchase that showed the family's improving situation. Ruth understood then that the payments she generated were being spent on conveniences for the family that had thrown her away. Her labor brought comfort for people who had chosen to forget she existed. The seasonal rhythms continued. Spring planting, summer harvests, autumn preparations for winter, then the brutal cold months when isolation became total. Ruth grew taller, stronger, more efficient in her work. She learned to guess the Spurlock family's needs before being told, to move through her duties with minimum interaction, to make herself as invisible as possible while remaining constantly available. The twins, now 5 years old, treated Ruth with casual cruelty learned from watching their parents. They threw food they disliked directly onto the floor, knowing Ruth would clean it. They demanded stories and songs, then complained loudly if Ruth's voice annoyed them. They lived in a world where other people served their wishes without question, and Ruth represented the lowest level of that system. By her 14th birthday, Ruth had stopped imagining rescue.